mean, nicotine is one thing, right? Yeah, I mean, it's fairly clearly that when you look at what nicotine does in the body, that it's a nerve poison. And when you smoke nicotine, you are essentially giving your body poison that your body then has to release. And in that release, all kinds of other things are being pulled out of the body. Vitamins, magnesium, that kind of stuff. So that's one thing. But you said you stopped that. And now what's left is the habit. And the habit of smoking is as strong as an addiction to nicotine. And the reason I'm saying addiction to nicotine with big quotation marks is that it actually only takes 3 days for nicotine to leave your body. So if you could just, make yourself not have nicotine for 3 days, you should technically be done with smoking, if it was just nicotine addiction. But that's the minor aspect of what makes smoking habitually necessary. It is a combination of the activity, the place you do the activity, or the time you take to do the activity, and the breath, or the inhale, exhale, right? And so those are the things. I don't want to go too deep into it because it's such a specific thing. But way back when I ran the drug rehab, we had to deal a lot with smoking because it was the only thing that people had left. So they went from like 1 pack a day to 5 packs a day, and it was the smoking corner was essentially an entire field full of people just like going at it, which is very unhealthy, of course. So it's essentially the association with smoking being a time away, a time of contemplation, a time away for yourself, which is one big aspect. It's habit, meaning it is a movement, and like you said, the right hand, the inhale, the exhale, the feeling of the relief, that's, is a strong association there. And then you have the breath in itself, where that inhale, long exhale, does a kind of a regulation. So those are the 3 pieces, the taking the time away, the habitual, the going through a habitual release pattern, and the actual breath release. And so you could play around with, let's say, only smoking with your left hand, only smoking after you've done, some breathing or whatever, to see what happens then. If you want to get under, is it necessary or not? Do you want to do it or not? Right? Anything that you have to do is running you, and that's never a good idea. Regardless of ideological or health consideration or anything else, it's, do you want to be run by habits and patterns, or do you want to be the one running those habits and patterns? And that's how you can look at it. Is this something you can get under enough that you have choice? And then if you have choice, then you can make better choices, better decisions. Yeah. So it's not don't ever do or whatever, right? I mean, there's many things people do that are equally detrimental, and it's not talked about because it's not, it's not seen like this. So it's a personal choice, but you want to make that choice versus the choice making you. Yes and no. So yes and no in the sense that essentially in the nervous system, as we've talked about ad nauseum, there are very specific, let's say, allowances made for releasing. Right? It's the only way. Mammal, well, it's mostly, that we have the nervous system of a mammal. This happens also in other species, reptiles, but slightly different. But in the nervous system of a mammal, the de-escalation from a fight or flight situation is essential for thriving. The reason it's called fight or flight and rest and digest, or feed and breed, depending on whom you listen to, is that any one of those spikes that you have to have so that you can survive needs to be followed by de-escalation, or you can't continue thriving. You can't continue feeding and breeding, which is on the base survival level of human, existence, the single most important thing. You want to stay alive and have offspring. That's all there is to it. Everything else is extra, so to speak. So we have these very, very elegant mechanisms that de-escalate us from a adrenal spike situation, so we can go back to actually living our lives. And so in a healthy system, you would have a spike, which is not in itself a bad thing, right? Because it's necessary. And then you would immediately, when it's done, have the de-escalation. And so when we do release, we are essentially cueing the system to clean out old spikes that haven't been cleared, and also anything that's acute, right? But it's old and acute. And so even if you don't have anything acute, you can, if you just stick with it for long enough, release, residue, so to speak. That residue might or might not have content based on how old it is and what kind of residue. Some residue is just, let's say, a tension pattern in the fascia. But some residue has emotional content that then produces mental content, right? But you don't know that, and when you're releasing, the best kind of releases, you don't even know what the hell is happening, right? It just washes out without you having to deal with it again. And that kind of release, when it's done, and there's really not much you need to do in the realm of aftercare, meaning you don't have to journal about it or things like that. But if you have something that shows up, that pops into your mind as you're releasing, and that's still with you when you are done, then you could do aftercare in the form of journaling, talking with somebody qualified about it. You could also do a long rest, for instance. Now here, of course, we get up, but when you do this at home, you could then go, okay, and then, like, say, sleep for 20 minutes so that your body can further, unwind it. Dreams, of course. Anyone who's done longer retreats knows what happens when you start dreaming, right? When your subconscious mind starts churning things out, even at night. So that can happen. And of course, you can always use water to kind of help the nervous system settle and further release. So those are the things you can do. But if there isn't anything that goes, oh, wow, I didn't even know that was still here, right? Because you have this mental or emotional funk about it or puzzlement about it, then you can do a bit of aftercare. But other than that, you just move right along. Yeah, typically, if you had an accidental pickup, which happens to all of us, it can even happen when you watch a movie or something like that, where you just merge so deeply that you have some residue afterwards. Then a good release practice will typically take care of it. But what would be good to consider is also, you can always do, smudging, take an incense stick, go somewhere, where it's nice and expansive, like on the top of the deck, and then very deliberately smudge your entire field, so to speak, and maybe even make like motions. And of course, the thing about that accidental merging is that when you have to also essentially wish the person you merged with well, and not go, oh God, because that's, of course, not good for their system. You have to essentially go, oh, sorry that I kind of went in there with you. Thank you. I wish you well. May you be happy. All those kind of things. And then just assert the boundary again. And then just, as always, it's always like, move on. Right? That's the important piece. You always want to do the action and then very decisively move on, because it's the dwelling and going over and picking it, like a scab that's almost healed, and you go and you pick it a bit again because there's something in there. And then, of course, then that creates a pattern. So it's like you take care of business as quickly as you can, and then you kind of leave it behind, right? Typically, when we have accidental mergers, it's because, like you said, I'm saying this just for everyone else, it has to do with the fact that it attaches to an existing pattern. And so then you can go, oh, cool, here's my pattern. Now let me work with that. Well, with mental imprints, it is actually not that hard, but you have to know what you're dealing with, right? So, because essentially with a bodily imprint, if you open yourself to somebody sexually very deeply, that's either good or bad, in the sense that, for some people it's quite bad because, let's just say you have like a deep relationship with somebody, they have a really deep sexual imprint on you that's connected to pleasure, but also to ecstasy, opening, bliss, things like that. But it's connected to that person, and the person leaves. And then what typically happens is, anytime you have ecstasy, bliss, openness, sexual pleasure, that person shows back up in your mind. And then that clenches you down because there's pain, there's hurt or betrayal or sadness or loss or grief or whatever, right? So then that affects people's ability to have a lot of, to have pleasure or have opening, ecstatic bliss. So that's one set of circumstances that you can work with bodily easier. But the thing that you're describing, where you're essentially being conditioned to be devalued for the sake of somebody feeding on you, is the best way of describing it. Because in those kind of particularly mentally toxic, what often is called narcissistic, or, some other traits. Not everybody's a narcissist who displays those traits, but there's very specific traits within the, let's say, spectrum of narcissism that people can display even if they're not full-blown narcissists. But within that, there's a very strong sense of, I know how it is, you don't know how it is, you think you know how it is, but I know a lot better, and here is why. And any questioning of that is further used to devalue you, right? So you end up in the spiral of going, well, but, you have a thought that goes, this is not right, and then that thought is used against you. This happens a lot in the workshop circuits, right? There's people who have made a career out of telling people that they're closed down, or they're not open enough, or they're not spiritual enough, or their breath isn't deep enough, or their sitting practice isn't good enough, or whatever, right? And it's like, it's a devaluing of the person to create value in the other person, so that the energy goes to that person, and the person gets fed by the energy of that person. And of course, if it's a group of people, you can very easily impose that on a whole group of people who then all look the same, talk the same, do the same things, and feed that person. If it's your partner, it's not as easy to, it's not easy to see for people who are in that vortex either, but typically afterwards people go, right, they can grow out of it. But if it's your partner and you have these aspirations of a life together, I know you guys were traveling together for a while there in the van. It was a van, right? Yeah, exactly. So essentially what happens is you become the energy source of that person. There's people who are chronically low energy, and they have to feed on other people's energy to be actually, to get going. And so if you have a partnership with somebody like that, you essentially need to be kept in that place of being willing to feed that energy to that person. And how that dynamic works is that you somehow think you're not good enough, and so you have to work harder, and they tell you you're not good enough, so you do work harder, but also on occasion, intermittent reward system, they do tell you how amazing you are, and they see you better than anybody else has ever seen you. Yeah, right? And that's the fuck there, is that essentially you go, oh my God, this person really sees me. And then, you're like there, but they see you so they can harvest you, essentially, is one of the ways to look at it. Right? So what happens over time is you don't know that that's happening till you're way in it. And at that point, you don't have enough energy to get out or easily get out. Right? Even if you get out, you still have those imprints because that's the whole idea. Right? So any good cult leader or toxic boyfriend, girlfriend will essentially find the very thing that you have as a deficit and latch in there. But it's parasitic. That's the best way to describe it. It's parasitic, right? It's finding the weak spot, going in there, and then pulling from there. Because if somebody says to you, I don't know, you're never going to be a mother, you're going to go, well, but I am. Fuck off, right? Obviously, that's not going to work. But you'll never grow. You'll be there forever. If you don't do X, you're not going to be enlightened or, holy or exalted or whatever, right? So that's the way in, because you are a practitioner and you have practiced for a long period of time. So it's classic shit. But because it's classic shit, it's much easier to divest yourself of that because you know what it is, right? So in some way, you could say that the things he said are like a curse. So curses you can undo by reframing them. It's fairly easy. You have to essentially just know what is being said and say the opposite. And then say the opposite repeatedly in practice, right? That's your mantra. Your mantra is the opposite of the curse. And you mantra the fuck out of it till your mind reframes through, it's neuroplasticity. It's not that hard to do, in the sense that it goes way faster than the body changes. But you will have to mantra the fuck out of it. So you essentially find the 2 or 3 key sentences that he said, you rephrase them as a mantra of the opposite, and then you go to town. Nice strong mala, 100 times at a time, several times a day, won't take very long. It's okay on occasion to give your partner energy because they need it. But in general, you want a partner who is able to source themselves without you, mainlining some energy to them. It's okay, like I said, on occasion, but it's not okay on a regular basis. So anytime you're in a relationship with somebody where you constantly have to open your veins, beyond what's good and right, then that's something to really look at. And of course, this is the thing that you have to consider. And there's a lot of people like this in here. If you go, I'm really strong and resourced, that's the entry into being harvested. I'm really strong and resourced, she said, right? I wouldn't think it would affect me because I'm really strong and resourced. That's essentially the invitation, because you are saying I have extra, and so I'll give of myself because I have extra. And the more abundant you are and the more energy you have, the easier it is to say, hey, have my stuff, right? Yeah, have a piece. But the problem with that is that that's an invitation for parasites as well. I mean, we've all been there, right? You meet a guy or a girl, whatever, right? And it's cool. And then immediately there's some kind of a thing that they require from you, right? Something. They locked their key out of their car, they forgot their wallet, whatever, right? Like there's something that is an invitation to now supply energy. And particularly in the beginning of a dating experience, you don't want to supply that energy. You want to actually lean back and go, what are they doing? How do they source themselves? Because if you step in, you're essentially saying, I'm available to straighten yourself out. And this is, by the way, true not only for guys with narcissistic tendencies or women with narcissistic tendencies. This is true in general, right? If you are the one who volunteers the sorting out, you will be the sorter outer in the relationship. Yeah, as long as you do it, she won't. That's the laws of nature, right? And so it's sometimes very, very hard, particularly with a sister or something, somebody who you have family ties and love, is to essentially go, right, and just sit on your hands, so to speak, and keep your mouth shut and watch the thing fall apart. It's really, really, really rough. And typically, you don't start there if you've already gone there. You pull it back slowly, right? You don't go cold turkey on somebody who's dependent on you, so to speak, right? But I always joke about it, is that when you first learn to set boundaries energetically, you set those boundaries with inanimate objects, meaning you don't let your plants die or your children die or your family die, right? You kind of pull it back in areas where there isn't so much at stake. Yeah. Like little things, like somebody calls and says, can you give me a ride? And you could, but they could also grab an Uber, right? It's not an emergency. They're not like stuck in Dartmoor on the hill with no reception. Well, then I couldn't call you. And that you're the only way out, right? It's just you're the most convenient way out. And anytime you have one of those moments where you are the most convenient way out, you can go, no, I'll happily call you an Uber. I'm the expert of happily calling people Ubers, right? I'm still available for help. I even pay for it, but I'm not getting into the car unless you are in a dire situation, and I'm the only resource, because it's a thing. Now, this is not true when you're in a really healthy, well-established relationship where you don't feel an imbalance, right? But if you do feel an imbalance, the way to pull back is incrementally till yours is yours and hers is hers or his is his, right? And then have the discipline to not step in every time, because that's the curse of the capable, right? The curse of the capable is it's gonna be you, right? And it doesn't have to be you, because there's a huge price to be paid when you're always capable. Because when you, God forbid, ever need help, you'll be surrounded by incapable people freaking out. That's what I'm saying. It's the curse of the incapable. You're suddenly like, fuck, I really actually do need some help. And these people all around me are imploding, right? And so you have to raise people to be able to step up to the occasion. And you do that by not bleeding yourself out.